this spring, when Carol Jenkins called us together to look at some of the coverage of the Democratic and Republican primaries, it was clear that we had a ways to go. In a primary that had the first African American and woman as contenders for the Democratic nomination, and on the Republican side, an older man who was almost certain to be the Republican nominee, we looked at the coverage and realized that we needed some help in this quest to ensure fair and accurate coverage. And so what we did was we decided that we would convene a series of conversations. And we realized that the conversation could start and end with the fact that between 77 and 87% of the news media is all white. That depends on whether you're looking at the print or broadcast side. And only 3% of the decision makers are women. And we could look at that and say, well, no wonder the media is having all these missteps. But we figured we'd go a step further and try to convene conversations that would help not only the media figure out how it could write that coverage, and by the way, that those demographics are not a winning formula for going forward in this industry, but we also wanted to empower people of color, women, everybody who's concerned with fair and accurate coverage so that they could hold the media responsible.
Women's Media Center, founded just 3 years ago by Gloria Steinem, Jane Fonda, and Robert Morgan, because we were concerned about the representation of women. Our mission is to make women visible and powerful in the media. The reason that we put together our first viral campaign, Sexism Sells, but we're not buying it. If you haven't seen it, go to YouTube. 250,000 people have, and thousands of people have signed our petition, telling the networks that in so many instances they had crossed way over the line and that people were watching. And I think that that really is the purpose of these gatherings that we're having, to make sure that we have a way, a way for people to respond. And this is one of those ways. We did instant polling at that first gathering at the Paley Center, and a full 75% of our audience members in that first meeting reported a belief that the U.S. media industry lacks the diversity and cultural competency, understanding other cultures, to accurately report on issues concerning candidates' race, gender, class, and age. And those were the 4 fault lines that we covered in that first panel, and the ones that we'll be talking a little bit about today.
If you have bias as some sort of as some sort of ideal in opposition to neutrality, and neutrality is your ideal, then I think that it's almost inescapable that we're all biased. We're all socially situated, we all have a culture, we all have trauma, we all have experiences, and there's a certain unreality about the expectation that we will be completely unbiased. And it does seem to me that when you put yourself in the situation of assuming that you are eternally and always unbiased, then you set yourself up for the kinds of unconscious, uncorrected blindness to your own prejudices and how you express them, the sort of cognitive dissonance that results from that.
In this primary season, here we are having these unprecedented and very thrilling conversations in which we're talking about race and gender and power and the presidency. And that's fantastic. But we also need to think about some of the ways that those stories were told. An example, some of the ways in which what was a complicated story was reduced. The narrative was sexism in the primary campaign was only directed at Hillary Clinton, and it was about Iron My Shirt and the Nutcracker. That's not a complete story. That's not the story of what it means to talk about a woman running for president in the way that Hillary did. It's only the tip of the iceberg of what kinds of prejudices and biases were present in the language that wasn't directly misogynist, that wasn't directly, I don't believe a woman should be in the White House, and therefore I'm not going to vote for Hillary Clinton, or, she's a bitch. It didn't have to be that obvious for there to be gender bias there. Also, gender bias was being directed at, for example, Michelle Obama in a way that didn't get talked about. These were just ways that it wasn't as simple as the media wanted it to be. The fact that there was a generational divide between, say, young women and older women in terms of how they voted, according, the polls, and there are numbers that back that up. That was told in a way, it was, this is the end of feminism. Mothers and daughters are at each other's throats. That was the easy narrative that we went to, and it wasn't the complete story of what was going on. There was much more complicated stuff going on there.
The bias manifests itself, at least a lot of it that I see, is in word choices, because it indicates where you're coming from. For example, take the Jeremiah Wright situation, which blew up. Some stories called his remarks anti-American. Some others said that he was criticizing American policy, and there's a big difference there. Some of that can be attributed to laziness, or perhaps, in your worldview, opposing American policy is anti-American. And so that's what I mean in terms of these word choices and what they say about the person who is expressing them. People come from different perspectives, and I think that that's at the root of what's biased and what's not.
I could share with you from our own personal example working with Voto Latino, an advocacy organization trying to register young people to vote. And I can tell you from the onset of it, it wasn't until folks started saying that Latinos would not vote for a black candidate that we started getting a phone call. And that's when all of a sudden it became news, and it became interesting, and it became exciting. And we immediately, within the 24-hour news cycle, we worked very closely with the Hip Hop Summit and said, you know what, this is simply not true when you look at it the historical context. But it was very easy for individuals to see their, to see their world through their lens and just assume that you were going to translate that perception to a whole other group. And that's the danger, because it wasn't until we had to go on, we had to go on to all the networks and start really saying, look, historically, that's just not correct. They didn't want to hear that story. And to this day, there's still a lot of that tendency.
I actually believe we're all biased. I believe everybody brings their biases to the media. I also believe the audience brings its biases. I would literally sit on television and have a conversation and make this comment about Barack Obama or about Hillary Clinton, and I would get an email from a Barack Obama supporter who said that that was right, and then I get it, or wrong, because I wasn't hard enough or tough enough. Then I get an email from a Hillary Clinton supporter that said I was too tough. Or I would get an email from two different Barack Obama supporters saying two different things. So everybody was approaching it. And there are people who watch CNN who would think, well, CNN was completely, all the Obama people thought that CNN was completely biased toward Hillary Clinton. And then all the Hillary Clinton people would say, oh, CNN is completely biased toward Barack Obama. So the audience is bringing its own sense of what they expect or what they view in their interpretation of what they see.
The news business has really changed, certainly since I went into it in the late 70s. I mean, the networks used to make at least feign that they were non-biased, and really all that has gone out the window. And I think it went out the window a lot earlier than we all sort of were watching. I mean, Diane Sawyer, longtime ABC star and host of GMA, she came out of the Nixon press office, and sort of nobody seemed to notice. But when I started out in journalism in the 70s, there was no revolving door. I mean, the journalists had been lifetime journalists, and I didn't vote. I still sometimes don't vote when I feel like I'm getting too emotionally attached, and I know how old school that is, but I feel like I shouldn't be rooting for one candidate or another, and the times that I have voted, it does seep into my reporting.